I've been a forest ranger for 6 years. Before that, I did 2 tours in Afghanistan. I'm telling you that not to impress you, but because I need you to understand the kind of person I am. I don't rattle easily. I've been in situations that would make most people fall apart, and I kept it together. I'm not someone who imagines things. I'm not someone who scares. I am someone who put in a transfer request after 4 days at a remote station in the Ocala National Forest in Central Florida and refused to go back. Make of that what you will. The assignment was a solo rotation at a small interior ranger station, basically a one-room rest stop built into a clearing about 9 miles from the nearest paved road. Used as a waypoint for long patrol loops, a place to sleep between check-ins, log reports, store equipment. It had a cot, a desk, a small generator, a bathroom the size of a closet, and 4 walls. No neighbors, no nearby campsites, just pine scrub and palmetto brush and darkness in every direction once the sun went down. I arrived on a Monday afternoon in late August, unloaded my gear, ran my first patrol loop before sunset, ate, filed my check-in, and went to sleep early. First night was completely fine. I slept well, no issues. Tuesday night is when I saw the child for the first time. I was finishing my last perimeter check around midnight, doing a slow walk around the clearing with my flashlight before turning in. The clearing was maybe 80 feet across, with the station at the center and the tree line ringing the whole thing. Standard stuff. I'd done it the night before without thinking twice. I was on the north side of the clearing, maybe 30 feet from the tree line, when I pointed my flashlight toward the trees and caught something that made me stop cold. A child, standing just inside the tree line, half behind a pine trunk, looking at me. Small, maybe 8 or 9 years old by the size. I couldn't make out clothing clearly in the dark, but what I could see, what I saw immediately and what I cannot explain, was that its eyes were reflecting my flashlight in a way that human eyes don't reflect light. Not the dull, natural shine you get from a person caught in a beam. This was brighter, paler, like 2 small lights turned on behind the face rather than reflected off it. I stood completely still. The child stood completely still. I called out, asked if anyone was there, identified myself as a ranger, asked if they were lost or hurt. Standard protocol. My voice went out into the dark and came back as nothing. The child didn't move, didn't respond, just stood there between those trees, staring at me with those pale, lit-up eyes. I started walking toward it. The moment I took my 3rd step in its direction, it was gone. No movement I could track, no sound of footsteps or breaking brush. Between one blink and the next, it simply was not there anymore. I walked to the tree line and put my flashlight beam through the gap where it had been standing. Flat ground, pine needles, nothing disturbed. No footprints, no sign that anything had been standing there at all. I wrote it up as a possible lost juvenile, notified dispatch, and requested a welfare check on surrounding trail access points. Nothing came back. No missing persons reports in the area, no vehicles at the trailheads, nothing. Tuesday night, I saw it again. Different position this time, the east side of the clearing, closer to the tree line, not hidden behind a trunk, just standing in the open at the edge of the trees. Same size, same pale, glowing eyes catching my flashlight in that wrong, too bright way. I watched it for longer this time before I moved toward it, maybe 2 full minutes. It watched me back without moving, without making a sound. The moment I stepped off the station porch, it disappeared, same as before, between one step and the next, gone. I checked the tree line, nothing. I went back inside and sat at the desk for a long time. Friday night was when it stopped being something I could hold at arm's length and rationalize. I was at my desk around 10 p.m. filing patrol reports when I heard the footsteps, small, fast footsteps on the dirt outside, running footsteps, the kind a child makes when they're playing, that light, quick patter that you recognize instantly if you've ever been around kids. They went around the north side of the station, and I was already standing up before I'd made the decision to stand. I went to the window and looked out. The clearing was empty, pale moonlight on flat dirt, tree line dark and still, nobody there. I sat back down. 30 seconds later, I heard the laughter. I want to be careful how I describe this, because I don't want to over-dramatize it. It wasn't screaming, it wasn't demonic, it wasn't the kind of thing you'd hear in a horror movie. It was just a child laughing, high-pitched, bright, the kind of laugh that sounds like pure enjoyment. And that's exactly what made it unbearable to listen to, because it was 10 p.m. and I was 9 miles from the nearest road, and there was no child out there. There was no possible reason for that sound to be coming from outside that station in the middle of that forest. It lasted maybe 5 seconds and stopped. Then the stones started hitting the walls. Not thrown hard, not aggressive, just stones impacting the exterior walls at intervals. One, then a pause, then one on a different wall, then a pause, then one on the door, like a kid throwing rocks the way kids do when they're bored, testing what makes a sound. The pattern was almost playful, which was somehow worse than if it had been violent or frantic. It went on for maybe 3 minutes. I sat completely still with my hand on my radio and listened to every single impact. When it stopped, I gave it 60 seconds and then I opened the door. The clearing was empty, still, not a sound anywhere. I walked the full perimeter with my flashlight and found nothing. No stones near the walls despite having clearly heard them hitting. No footprints in the dirt around the station. No marks on the exterior walls. I stood in the middle of that clearing at 10:30 at night and turned in a slow circle with my flashlight and understood for the first time in my adult life what it feels like to be completely, genuinely afraid. Friday night, it escalated. I was already on edge from 3 nights of it. I hadn't slept more than a couple hours. I was sitting on the edge of the cot with my boots still on when the knocking started. Not the playful stone throwing from the night before, actual knocking on the station door. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more knocks. Deliberate, patient, the kind of knock that understands what a knock is for. I put my hand on the door handle and I stopped. I stood there with my hand on that door handle and I made a decision that I've never made before in my life in any situation. I did not open the door. I don't know how to explain that decision fully. I'm not a person who hides from things, but everything in my body was telling me that opening that door was the wrong thing to do, that whatever was on the other side of it was not something I was equipped to handle with a flashlight and a radio. The knocking went on for maybe 10 minutes, then it stopped. I requested a rotation reassignment first thing the next morning. I told my supervisor it was a personal matter. He didn't push it. I was out of that station by noon. I've thought about that child almost every day since then, about those pale, bright eyes at the tree line, about the laughter at 10 p.m. in an empty forest, about what was standing on the other side of that door knocking with such patience, such complete certainty that eventually I would open it. I've done a lot of reading since then, talked to a few people, looked into the history of that section of Ocala. I found some things I wish I hadn't found. Old reports, older stories from people who worked that area decades before I did. I'm not going to get into the details of what I found because I don't want to go back down that rabbit hole. What I will say is this: whatever that thing was, it wasn't lost. It wasn't a child who wandered in from somewhere. It had been in those woods for a very long time, and it had learned over all that time exactly which sounds a person cannot ignore. A child's laughter, a child's knock, the one thing every adult instinct tells you to respond to. It knew that. It had always known that. And I think it's still out there right now, standing at the edge of that clearing in the dark, waiting for the next ranger to come along who will make a different choice than I did. I worked as a forest ranger for the U.S. Forest Service for about 3 years, specifically out of the Ouachita National Forest in western Arkansas. It's about 3 million acres of pine and hardwood, hiking trails, remote campgrounds, and a whole lot of nothing in between. Most people picture a ranger job as something out of a postcard: fresh air, wildlife, beautiful scenery. And honestly, most of the time it was exactly that. But the night shifts were different. Nobody really talks about the night shifts. You're out there alone, driving fire roads that don't show up on Google Maps, checking on campsites that are sometimes 40 minutes apart, with nothing but your truck headlights and a radio that cuts out more often than it should. It's isolating in a way that's hard to explain. The forest at night is a completely different place than the forest during the day. The sounds change, the air changes. Everything feels slightly more hostile, like the daytime version was just putting on a show for the visitors and now it's dropped the act. I'd been on the job about 14 months when it happened. Late October, which meant the campgrounds were mostly empty, and my patrol loop covered a lot of ground with almost nobody out there. My supervisor had called in sick, so I was covering a larger stretch than usual, about 60 miles of road between 4 remote sites. My shift ran 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. By midnight, I'd checked 3 of the 4 sites, all empty, all quiet. I was heading out to the last one, Site 7, which was the furthest in and the most isolated. Barely anyone used it, even in peak season. I was driving slow down the fire road, windows cracked, radio on low, just doing my thing. That's when my headlights caught something at the edge of the tree line. A figure, standing just inside the tree line, partially behind a pine trunk. Tall. I only saw it for about 2 seconds before the road curved and it was behind me. I slowed down and looked in my mirror. Nothing but darkness. I figured it was a late camper. People sometimes hiked in after dark even though they weren't supposed to. I made a mental note to check it on my way back and kept driving. Site 7 was empty. No vehicles, no tents, no fire pits recently used. I logged it and turned around. On the way back, I slowed down when I got to the spot where I'd seen the figure. I hit my spotlight and swept it across the tree line. Nothing. I rolled the window all the way down and sat there listening. The forest was dead quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet. The kind where your brain starts telling you to leave without being able to explain why. I was about to roll the window back up when I heard it. A sound I still can't describe properly. The closest I can get is, imagine someone trying to imitate the sound of a large animal moving through brush, but they've never actually heard it before and they're just guessing. It was almost right, almost natural, but there was something off about the rhythm of it, something too deliberate, like whatever was making it was doing it on purpose, wanting me to hear it. I hit my spotlight again. It was standing in the road, 20 feet in front of my truck, directly in the beam of my headlights. I can tell you it was tall, easily 7 feet, maybe more. I can tell you it was thin in a way that didn't look right, like the proportions were just slightly wrong. Long arms, head that seemed too large. It was standing completely still, directly in my headlights, and I could not make out a face. Just a dark shape absorbing the light in a way that made my eyes feel wrong for looking at it. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. My hand was on the radio and I could not make myself press the button. It tilted its head. That's the part I can't get out of my brain. Not a dramatic movement, just a slow, quiet tilt, the way a dog looks at you when it hears a sound it doesn't understand. Except it wasn't a dog, and it wasn't confused. I have never felt more clearly in my life that something was looking at me the way I look at something that doesn't know it's being watched. Then it stepped sideways off the road and into the tree line, and it was gone. I sat in that truck for a full 3 minutes before I could make my hands work. Then I turned around and drove in the opposite direction and did not stop until I hit the main highway. I called it in as a possible trespasser and let someone else follow up. Nobody found anything. No tracks, no evidence of anyone being out there. My supervisor looked at me a little strange when I filed the report, and I never brought it up again. I finished out my contract and didn't renew. I work a desk job in Little Rock now. I don't go hiking, I don't camp, I don't drive through forested areas at night if I can avoid it. People ask me sometimes if I miss the outdoors, if I miss the job. I tell them no, and I mean it completely. Because the thing I learned doing night patrol in Ouachita is that there are parts of those 3 million acres that have never been mapped, roads that aren't on any record, trails that don't lead anywhere a person should go. And whatever lives in those places, it already knew I was there long before my headlights ever found it. I need to preface this by saying I've told this story exactly twice. Once to my wife, the night it happened, and once to my buddy Jake, who's also a ranger, and who believed me without asking a single follow-up question, which honestly told me more than I wanted to know. I'm only putting it out there now because I still have no explanation for what I experienced, and carrying something like this around alone for 2 years starts to get heavy. I was stationed out of the Chattahoochee National Forest in northern Georgia. Beautiful country during the day, dense hardwood forest, cold mountain streams, elevation that makes the air taste clean in a way you don't get anywhere else. I'd been doing the job for about 2.5 years at that point, and I knew my patrol zone the way you know your own neighborhood. Every trail junction, every fire road, every creek crossing. I'd walked those routes in the dark enough times that I didn't need a map. That's important. I want you to understand that I was not lost. I was not confused. I was not in unfamiliar territory. Whatever I encountered that night found me on ground I knew by heart. It was a Thursday in mid-November. My shift partner had called out sick, and rather than pulling in someone from the North District to cover, my supervisor just extended my solo patrol loop. More ground, same hours. I wasn't thrilled about it, but it wasn't unusual. I started my foot patrol section around 10 p.m. There's a stretch of about 4 miles near the Cohata Wilderness boundary that you can't access by vehicle, so you walk it. I'd done it solo maybe a dozen times. The first 2 miles were completely normal. Cold night, clear sky, full moon, giving enough light through the canopy that I wasn't running my flashlight constantly. I had my radio, my sidearm, my pack. I was moving at a steady pace, checking the trail markers, logging each waypoint. The forest was doing what forests do at night. Small sounds, distant movement in the brush, the occasional crack of a branch somewhere in the dark. Normal. All of it completely normal. It was somewhere around the 2-mile mark that I heard the first footstep. One single footstep. Behind me and to the left, maybe 30 feet off the trail. The sound of a boot or a foot coming down on dry leaves. Distinct, intentional sounding. I stopped and turned and put my flashlight beam into the trees. Nothing. I stood there for a good 30 seconds just listening. Nothing moved, nothing made another sound. I figured it was a deer, maybe a hog. We get wild hogs out there and they can sound surprisingly human when they're moving slow. I turned back around and kept walking. 20 steps later, I heard it again. Same distance behind me, same side. One footstep, then silence. I turned around faster this time and swept the light in a wide arc through the trees on both sides of the trail. That's when I saw the eyes. 2 points of reflection, low to the ground, maybe 40 feet into the tree line on my left. I held the beam on them. They didn't move. Most animals break eye contact and move away when you put light on them. It's a basic response. These didn't. They just held there, perfectly still, staring back at me. I couldn't make out a body, no shape, no outline, just those two pale, reflective points floating in the dark between the trees. I took one step toward them. They dropped, straight down, like whatever they belonged to had simply crouched or lowered itself to the ground, and then they were gone. No sound of movement, no crashing brush, no retreat. They just went out like someone flipped a switch. I stood at the edge of the trail for a long time before I moved again. I almost turned back. I want to be honest about that. Every instinct I had was pointing back the way I came, back toward the trailhead, back toward my truck and the lights in the ranger station 20 minutes away. But I still had 2 miles of patrol to finish, and I'd never cut a foot patrol short in 2.5 years on the job. I told myself it was probably a bobcat. Bobcats will do that, hold eye contact longer than they should. I told myself that, and I kept walking. I found the first animal about 10 minutes later. A white-tailed deer, doe, off the left side of the trail, maybe 20 feet in. I almost missed it. I only caught it because my flashlight swept across something pale on the ground. I pushed through the brush to get a closer look, and I immediately wished I hadn't. The deer was dead. Not recently dead, but not long dead either. And it had been eaten. Not scavenged, not dragged down by a predator in any way I recognized. It had been opened up and consumed in a way that looked almost methodical. Large sections of meat removed cleanly, internal cavity exposed. But the head was untouched, the legs were untouched. Whatever had fed on it had been selective in a way that no predator I know of is selective. I photographed it and kept moving. I found 2 more within the next half mile. Same thing, same pattern. One was a raccoon, barely anything left of the midsection. One was something I couldn't identify, too damaged to be sure. All of them had that same quality, like something had eaten exactly what it wanted and left the rest with a precision that felt almost deliberate, almost like it was making a point. The footsteps had stopped. I hadn't heard one since the eyes disappeared, but I want to be clear. The silence was not a relief. The silence was worse, because silence meant I'd stopped being able to track where it was. I completed the patrol loop. I don't fully know how, muscle memory mostly. I logged every waypoint, filed every marker, and walked the last 1.5 miles to the trailhead at a pace that was not quite running, but was not walking either. When I broke out of the tree line and saw my truck sitting under the security light at the trailhead, I actually put my hand on the hood like I needed to confirm it was real. I wrote up the dead animals in my incident report as possible predator activity. My supervisor flagged it for the wildlife team to follow up on. I never heard what they concluded or if they concluded anything at all. I transferred to a different district 4 months later and didn't give a forwarding explanation. I want to give you something rational to hold on to at the end of this. I want to tell you it was a mountain lion or a pack of coyotes or some kind of natural explanation that makes the whole night make sense. I've tried to build that explanation for 2 years and I can't make it hold together. Because mountain lions don't count your footsteps. And whatever was in those woods that night understood exactly what I was doing every single moment. It tracked me for 4 miles in the dark without making a single mistake. It knew when I turned around. It knew when I was listening for it. It knew when to show itself and when to disappear. And those animals along the trail? I think now that they weren't a coincidence. I think I was meant to find them. I think they were there so I would understand something about what was walking behind me in the dark. I just haven't figured out what that something is yet. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to.